Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a closer look at risk management in pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Oh, yeah.
And you know how companies use those ICH-Q9 guidelines?
Mm-hmm.
And all those subjective risk assessments to really make sure that the medicines we all take are safe and effective.
Right.
It's a pretty big deal. And I think it gets especially interesting when we start talking about botanicals like psilocybin,
Yeah,
like those mushrooms and cannabis.
absolutely.
They're kind of like the new kids on the block when it comes to pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, they are. They're really interesting.
So how do they even begin to assess those risks
Right.
when the raw materials themselves are, kind of a wild card?
Well, that's where those ICH-Q9 guidelines really come into play.
Okay. Yeah.
They provide this framework. It's a very systematic approach,
Mm-hmm.
a science-based approach to risk management.
I see.
And it really pushes for this proactive risk assessment throughout the whole drug development life cycle.
So instead of just like reacting to problems after they happen,
It's much better to get ahead of them.
they're trying to like anticipate and prevent them right from the get-go.
Absolutely. And one of the key tools that they use is what's called failure mode and effects analysis, or FAA.
Okay, FMEA.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit intimidating.
It's a powerful tool, though.
Yeah.
Imagine you're designing a spacecraft.
Right.
An engineer using FMEA would very carefully analyze each and every single component,
Uh-huh.
identify any potential points of failure.
Right.
What if a valve malfunctions?
Ooh.
What if a sensor gives a false reading?
Right.
And by assessing each of those potential failures, they can then prioritize actions to prevent those failures from ever happening.
So in the context of pharmaceuticals, we're asking what could go wrong during manufacturing, and then how bad would it be if that did happen?
Precisely.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all kind of comes together.
Good.
But I've also heard about this thing called fault tree analysis, or FTA. How is that different from FMEA?
So think of FTA as a detective working backwards from a crime scene.
Okay.
Let's say there's a batch of medication that fails quality control.
Oh.
FTA would help to trace back all the potential causes, like a faulty piece of equipment,
Mm-hmm.
a contaminated raw material,
Right.
or even human error.
Oh, wow.
It's like building a family tree, but of failure.
Oh, I see.
So FMEA is all about preventing those failures before they happen.
Mm.
And FTA is about understanding what went wrong after the fact.
Right, so it's like a post-mortem. On those
Exactly.
Okay.
Both tools are really helpful in identifying vulnerabilities.
Right.
And they help to improve the overall process.
It's like a constant learning process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then on top of those, you have these risk scoring matrices,
Okay.
which bring in that really interesting subjective element.
Yes, the subjective part. That's where it always gets a little fuzzy for me.
Yeah.
How do you quantify risk when it's based on, expert opinion?
Right. Well, these matrices are actually designed to bring some structure to that subjective assessment.
Oh.
Experts use their knowledge
Right.
and their experience to assign severity scores
Okay.
and probability scores to potential risks.
So even if something's really unlikely to happen, if it would be really bad,
Yeah.
it would still get a high score.
Exactly.
Got it.
And then those scores can be used to prioritize actions
Mm-hmm.
to mitigate the highest risks.
So it's about focusing resources where they're going to have the biggest impact, right?
Precisely.
On safety and quality.
That's right.
Okay, I'm seeing how all these tools can work together to create a really comprehensive approach to managing risk.
Right.
But how do they adapt these approaches when we're talking about those unique challenges of botanicals?
Right.
Like we were talking about psilocybin,
Uh-huh.
that risk of fungal contamination.
Yeah.
It seems like a whole different ballgame.
It is.
Right.
And traditional risk assessment tools can still be applied, but they do need to be tailored. It's not just about contamination.
Right.
We were talking about cannabis.
Right.
The risk of those pesticide residues and how those regulations can make it even more critical to control those risks.
It's like an extra layer of complexity there.
Absolutely. Regulations always do.
Right.
And you've got to remember with botanicals, there's a lot of variability in the
Wow.
raw materials.
Yeah.
And we just don't have as much historical data
Okay.
on their processing and safety.
So it's like navigating a bit of a minefield, but with a blurry map.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Right.
For example, when you're assessing that risk of fungal contamination in psilocybin mushrooms,
Okay.
you've got to consider the growing conditions, the harvesting methods, even how they're stored.
Right.
All those things can introduce variability.
And potentially increase that risk.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Same goes for pesticide residues in cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
They might need to implement stricter testing procedures for those raw materials. Maybe even switch to different cultivation practices
I see.
to minimize those risks.
So it's like they're constantly adapting and refining their approach
You have
to keep up with all those botanical complexities.
Absolutely.
But how do they actually go from, identifying a risk to doing something about it?
Well, that's where those insights from the risk assessments come in.
Okay.
They can really guide the development
Uh-huh.
and implementation of control strategies.
So that might involve tweaking the process, doing more testing, or even changing where they get those raw material.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like a multi-layered defense system to protect against all those potential problems.
I like that.
But we're talking a lot about risks
Yeah.
and vulnerabilities.
Uh-huh.
It's starting to feel a little bit negative.
Right.
Is there a more, positive spin on all of this?
There is. And it leads us right into our next topic.
Okay.
Quality by design, or QBD.
Okay, QDD. That's about building quality into the process right from the beginning.
Yeah.
But how does that connect with risk management?
Well, they go hand in hand.
Okay.
You see, QBD uses those risk assessments that we were talking about, like the FMEAs and the FTAs, and it uses them as a roadmap to build a much more robust and reliable manufacturing process.
So it's like they're taking all those what ifs and turning them into like a blueprint for success.
Exactly. So we're back. And last time we were really getting into how those ICH Q9 guidelines and risk assessments are used to keep all those pharmaceutical gremlins away.
Right. And we left off on that super interesting idea of quality by design, QBD.
Yeah.
It almost sounded like magic.
Yeah.
Designing quality into a medicine right from the start.
Well, it's not magic, but it is pretty amazing.
Okay.
QBD takes all those risk assessments we talked about, like FMEAs and FTAs, and it uses those as like a roadmap to build a really strong and reliable manufacturing process.
So it's like taking all those what if questions.
Well, exactly.
And turning them into like a blueprint for success.
Yeah, it encourages companies to really hone in on those critical quality attributes.
Okay.
Those factors that have the biggest impact on how safe and effective the medicine is.
Right.
And then they design a process that consistently delivers those attributes.
That makes sense. But how do they actually put that into practice?
Think of it like baking a cake.
Okay.
A traditional approach might just be following that recipe and hoping for the best.
Right.
But with QBD, you're taking a much more scientific approach.
Okay.
You're experimenting with the ingredients,
Uh-huh.
the oven temperature,
Yeah.
the baking times,
Okay.
and you're trying to figure out the best combination to get that consistently delicious cake.
Got it.
So instead of blindly following instructions,
Right.
they're using data and experimentation
Okay.
to fine-tune that whole process.
So they're treating the whole manufacturing process like a giant experiment
Yeah,
and using all that data to guide their decisions.
exactly. And this data-driven approach has some serious perks.
Like what?
Well, it can lead to a more efficient process.
Okay.
Fewer surprises, when things go wrong.
Right.
And in the end, you get a higher quality product.
I bet the regulators are pretty happy about this too.
Oh, yeah, they love it.
Right.
Regulatory agencies like the FDA are big fans of QBD
Makes sense.
because it leads to better quality assurance.
Uh-huh.
And it gives them more confidence
Right.
that the medicine is being made consistently and it meets all those standards they set.
Sounds like everybody wins.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
But let's bring back those botanicals,
Oh, yeah.
those funky fungi and cannabis.
Right.
Do they throw a wrench into the QBD gears?
You know they do.
Right.
It can be really hard to set those tight control parameters that QBD is all about.
Because even if they nail the manufacturing process, if the starting materials is all over the place, you can't guarantee a consistent product.
Absolutely. And that's why they often need to have even stricter testing for those botanical raw materials. They need to be extra sure that those raw materials meet the standards before they even start making the medicine.
Okay, so it's like an extra layer of quality control
Exactly.
to account for that wild card factor.
Yeah, I like that.
Right.
And sometimes they might even have to develop brand new analytical techniques.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
To fully characterize those botanicals and make sure they're good to go for pharmaceuticals.
It sounds like they're keeping those scientists on their toes.
They definitely are.
But all this talk about risk management and quality control, it kind of sounds like it could stifle innovation.
A lot of people think that,
Right.
but QBD can actually encourage innovation
Oh, really?
by really understanding the process and all those critical parameters.
Yeah.
Companies can make better decisions about how to improve and optimize the product.
So it's not just about playing it safe.
No.
It's about using that knowledge to make better medicines.
Exactly. It lets them do controlled experiments within that design space.
Yeah.
And that encourages ongoing process improvements.
Right.
And even developing new and better formulations.
Now that's what I call a happy ending.
Right.
We started with these scary risk assessments, and now we're talking about innovation and better medicines.
It's a journey.
It is. It's a real redemption arc.
And that's what's great about risk management in pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
It's not just about dodging those problems.
Right.
It's about using what you learn to make progress and, in the end, improve things for patients.
I think our listeners deserve a round of applause for sticking with us on this complex topic.
Me too.
But before we wrap up, I have one last question for you.
Okay, shoot.
What's one thing our listeners should keep in mind as they're navigating this always changing world of pharmaceuticals, especially with all these new botanicals coming onto the scene?
That's a great question. And I think the most important thing is that risk management, it never stands still.
Okay.
It's always changing.
Yeah.
New technologies pop up, new challenges come along,
Right.
and new regulations are always on the horizon, especially when we're dealing with these botanicals.
So it's a constant learning process.
It really is for everyone involved.
And that's what keeps it so interesting.
Absolutely.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into all things risk management in the world of pharmaceuticals.
It's been a wild ride.
It has been. We've gone from trying to decipher all those ICH Q9 guidelines to unraveling the mysteries of QBD.
Yeah,
So we've really covered a lot of ground.
absolutely.
And today, we're looking ahead to the future,
That's right.
at all those emerging trends and those new challenges
Yeah.
that are shaping the whole landscape of risk management when it comes to pharmaceuticals.
Exactly.
And I'm really curious about how these new botanical drugs are kind of shaking things up,
Right.
because it feels like almost every day there's some new study
Yeah.
about the benefits of psilocybin or cannabis.
Right. There's so much research going on.
Yeah, so the botanical revolution is definitely happening,
Oh, it is.
and it seems like it's presenting some really exciting opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
but also a whole new set of challenges when it comes to risk management.
For sure.
I was reading that regulators are starting to really grapple with this whole idea of personalized medicine,
Yeah.
where those treatments are tailored to a person's specific genetic makeup.
It's a big deal.
So how does that impact risk assessment?
Well, it highlights one of the biggest trends we're seeing.
Okay.
The shift toward personalized and targeted therapies.
Right, so you're not just assessing the risk for like an average patient anymore.
Exactly.
You're really looking at that individual's genetic profile
Yeah.
and how they might respond to a specific treatment.
It adds a whole new layer of complexity.
And it's not just genetics, right?
Right.
It's also lifestyle,
Right.
diet, even their gut microbiome could play a role,
It all interacts.
right, in how someone reacts to a medication.
It definitely does.
So it's like those risk assessments are becoming much more individualized.
They are, and that means more data, more tools,
Okay.
and a deeper understanding of how all these factors play together.
That's got to keep those risk assessors busy.
Oh, they're definitely busy.
So what about the technology side of things?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any new tools or approaches that are really changing the game when it comes to risk management?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing a huge surge in the use of AI.
Really?
Yeah. Artificial intelligence
Yeah.
and machine learning.
In risk management.
Uh-huh. These technologies can help analyze massive amounts of data,
Okay.
identify those patterns,
Yeah.
and even predict potential risks much more effectively.
So it's like having a digital risk detective.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah, these AI systems can cut through all that noise and find the signals that might mean trouble.
Ah, this sounds so powerful.
It is, but there are also ethical things to consider.
Oh, right. Of course. AI always brings up those ethical questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that these systems are transparent and fair.
Unbiased.
Yes, and used
Yeah.
responsibly.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about how we use it
For sure.
and how we govern it.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important for scientists, regulators, and ethicists to keep talking to each other.
To work together.
Yeah,
So it seems like there's just a lot to think about as this field keeps evolving.
there is.
But for our listeners who are maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed with all this information, what's like one key takeaway they should remember about risk management in pharmaceuticals?
I'd say the most important thing to keep in mind is that it's all about continuous improvement.
Okay.
It's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about always trying to make medicines safer
Yeah.
and more effective.
It's a journey.
It really is. It's not a destination.
That's a great way to put it.
And that journey, it involves constantly learning and adapting and innovating.
And it's all driven by that commitment to patient safety.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's all about the patients.
Well said. It's been an amazing deep dive into this intricate world of risk management in pharmaceuticals.
It has.
We've really gone from those basic principles of ICH-Q9 all the way to the cutting edge.
AI-powered risk assessment.
Exactly. And we've seen how these tools and strategies are changing to meet those unique challenges.
Yeah, like with botanical drugs and personalized medicine.
And most importantly, I think we've seen how it all comes back to that one goal
Patient safety.
of making sure that the medicines we all rely on are as safe and effective as possible.
That's right.
So a big thanks to everyone for joining us on this enlightening journey.
I've had a blast.
Until next time.
Take care.